The afternoon light rested softly on the wooden frames of her small cottage, fading into that muted gold that seems to appear only at the edge of memory. At 80, Julie Christie no longer chased the world. She simply watched it drift by, quiet as dust floating in a sunbeam. Yet on this particular day, her voice broke the silence. A voice once celebrated for its warmth, now rendered fragile by time. She whispered a sentence she had never dared to say aloud. There are 5 people I have never forgiven. No bitterness, no drama, only the kind of weary truth that comes from carrying shadows for too many years. Her eyes, still luminous beneath their fine veil of age, traced the past as if searching for fragments she had tried to bury. The world had remembered her for elegance, defiance, and the rare beauty of someone who never fully belonged to the spotlight. But beneath the applause, beneath the myth, lay wounds that had never closed. The room held its breath. The light dimmed. Her hands, resting on a faded photograph, trembled just enough to reveal that the past was closer than it seemed. 5 names, 5 betrayals, 5 faces she could not erase. And tonight, for the first time, she was ready to speak. The story of Julie Christie does not begin on a film set or under a trembling cascade of applause. It begins in the distant quiet of rural Assam, where she was born in 1940 in a land of monsoons, tea fields, and long evenings drenched in the scent of earth. Her childhood unfolded between vast, open spaces in the fragile tension of a family that rarely spoke its truths aloud. Her father, often absent, carried storms behind his silence. Her mother, gentle yet unsettled, lived between longing and restraint. Julie learned early that some emotions grow in the dark. She understood the weight of unspoken words, the way a single disappointment could carve itself into memory. When her parents separated, the fracture left a thin, invisible crack running through her childhood, a crack that would later shape the way she loved, trusted, and protected herself. Moving to England as a young girl, she found a world colder, sharper, hung with gray skies. She watched people carefully, gathering gestures, heartbreaks, and unguarded moments as if storing them for a role she had not yet been asked to play. Loneliness became both her wound and her teacher. It taught her how to stand still while everything around her shifted. Those early years planted the first seeds of the unforgiven. Small betrayals, soft disappointments, and the realization that some faces, once lost, never return. And though she carried these memories quietly, they shaped the woman who would one day whisper those 5 irrevocable names. The years that followed felt like a long corridor, narrow at first, then slowly widening as Julie stepped into adulthood. She never sought fame. Fame found her quietly, like a shadow that had been walking beside her since childhood, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. London in the late 1950s was restless, shifting, a city caught between fading post-war exhaustion and the electric promise of something new. Julie moved through it softly, unnoticed at first, carrying with her an inner world more vivid than the city lights around her. Her breakthrough came almost by accident. A theater audition, a single scene, a gaze that lingered one breath longer than expected. Directors were struck not by loudness or charm, but by the strange vulnerability she carried, like someone who had seen too much and learned to speak only half of what she felt. And then came Billy Liar, then Darling, then the whirlwind she never asked for. Awards, magazine covers, a sudden avalanche of eyes trying to understand her. With every premiere, every camera flash, Julie stood a little straighter, though the distance inside her grew deeper. Stardom brought warmth, yes, but it also brought mirrors. Too many of them, each reflecting not the girl from Assam, nor the young woman shaped by a fractured childhood, but a symbol, an icon, a fantasy others needed her to be. Her grace, her mystery, her refusal to surrender to Hollywood's machinery made her a phenomenon. She became the face of a generation, the woman whose silence spoke more than most actresses' monologues. Yet even as she ascended, the early fractures of her life quietly resurfaced. Trust became fragile. Promises, whether offered with sincerity or ambition, felt unsafe. She learned to guard her heart behind a veil of elegant distance. The first betrayals of adulthood came softly. A confidant who twisted her words, a collaborator who used her name for their gain, a lover who mistook her vulnerability for weakness. None of these wounds were dramatic. They were subtle, precise, the kind that leave no visible scar yet alter the way a soul breathes. Julie's rise was luminous, but beneath the glow was a growing hollowness, a sense that the higher she climbed, the fewer people she could truly hold on to. Success amplified everything, the applause, the expectations, the loneliness. And somewhere along that ascent, the list of unforgiven began to take shape. Success had lifted Julie into a world of brilliance, but it was in that same brilliance that the shadows sharpened. The first true rupture came not with noise, but with an unexpected quiet. An evening when a trusted partner in her career delivered a betrayal so calculated, so calmly executed, that it left her breathless. A film deal she believed was built on mutual respect had been negotiated behind her back, her name used as leverage without her consent. It was the kind of wound that didn't bleed. It simply hollowed something out. Then came another blow, more personal, far more intimate. A relationship she had invested in with rare vulnerability, fractured under the weight of lies. He had promised presence but chose ambition, promised truth but hid a parallel life. When she discovered the truth, it was not shock that crushed her. It was recognition. Recognition of a pattern she had tried to escape since childhood, the slow erosion of trust by those closest to her. From that moment, Julie stopped believing easily in words. She studied people's silences more than their declarations. She withdrew, not dramatically, not publicly, but in subtle gestures, fewer calls returned, fewer doors opened, fewer chances given. Her career continued to flourish, yet inside her something tightened, as if guarding a fragile core from further harm. She carried her elegance like armor, her distance like a shield, and though she forgave small mistakes, she learned there were wounds that shaped themselves into permanence. From these ruptures, the list began to etch itself clearly. 5 faces, 5 stories, 5 betrayals she could neither forget nor forgive. 5 names, 5 wounds carved not in anger, but in the quiet erosion of trust that had followed Julie Christie through the decades. When she finally spoke of them at 80, her voice did not tremble out of fear, but out of recognition. Each name a doorway back to a moment she had tried to lay to rest. The first person she could never forgive came early in her career, long before fame hardened her resolve. He had been a close friend, gentle in manner, quick to laugh, the kind of presence she believed would anchor her in the whirlwind of London's rising film scene. But ambition can reshape even the softest faces. He traded her confidence for opportunity, revealing private conversations to secure a role she had recommended him for. It was a small betrayal in the grand scale of life, almost ordinary, yet it marked the beginning of her distrust. She learned that some wounds begin quietly. The second was unexpected, striking her at the height of her success. A director she admired, whose talent she trusted, turned against her when she refused to compromise her values for a studio contract. His public criticism was swift and merciless, disguised as artistic judgment but fueled by resentment. It wasn't the words that hurt. They were only words after all, but the realization that admiration can transform into cruelty when a woman refuses to bend. Julie carried the sting of that moment for years, not out of pride, but because she had believed in his sincerity. The third name rested deeper, older, shaped not in the glare of fame, but in the fragile intimacy of family, a sibling relationship strained by distance, misunderstandings, and unresolved years. When she left home young and England became her refuge, not everyone in her family forgave her. One voice in particular, sharp and distant, accused her of abandoning roots she had never chosen to lose. The fracture widened over time until what remained was only silence. She tried, letters, calls, gestures, but the answers never came. This was the wound that shaped her most profoundly. The knowledge that sometimes blood offers neither comfort nor belonging. The fourth was a different kind of betrayal, public, loud, and piercing. In the late 70s, as Julie retreated increasingly from Hollywood's demands, the press turned her caution into narrative. A journalist she once trusted twisted her refusal to participate in interviews into accusations of arrogance and ingratitude. The article spread quickly, painting her as cold, distant, unapproachable. She was no stranger to misinterpretation, but this one hurt. It reshaped how the world saw her, placing a veil between her true self and the image projected onto screens. She forgave the world for misunderstanding her, but not the one writer who had weaponized her silence. And then there was the fifth, the one she whispered last, the one she revealed only after a long pause, as if afraid the air itself might resist hearing it. The person she had never forgiven was herself, for leaving too soon, for staying too long, for trusting too quickly, for doubting too deeply, for choosing solitude when she needed companionship, and companionship when she needed solitude. She had forgiven lovers, friends, colleagues, even the strangers who judged her without knowing her story. But herself, her choices, her hesitations, her defenses built from childhood wounds, she had never fully absolved. This final revelation softened everything she had said before, because the truth spoken in that dim room at 80 was this: the greatest betrayals were rarely inflicted by others. They were born in the quiet moments when she turned away from her own needs, her own voice, her own fragile heart. 5 names, 4 from the world, 1 from within, and it was the last that weighed the heaviest. Evening settled slowly over the cottage, softening every contour of the room where Julie sat alone. The last light faded into a muted gold, the kind that feels almost borrowed from a dream. She rested her hands on the small wooden table, tracing absent circles on its surface, as if the grain beneath her fingertips could still answer questions she had carried for decades. The confession was done. The 5 names had finally found their voice. Yet strangely, she did not feel lighter, nor heavier. Only aware of how long the past can follow a person, how quietly unresolved grief can anchor itself to memory. A faint breeze slipped through the open window, stirring the edges of old photographs scattered across the table. Images of the woman she once was, fierce, gentle, searching, afraid. She looked at them without regret, but not without ache. For a moment she closed her eyes. The silence around her seemed almost companionable now. No longer a weight, but a presence. She wondered if forgiveness had ever been the goal, or if naming the wounds was all she had needed to finally breathe without their shadow. When she opened her eyes, the room felt still, caught between night and something softer than night. And then the question lingered, quiet as a final note. Can a life be complete without forgiveness? Or is the act of remembering itself a kind of redemption?